Have you ever paused to wonder how your brain remembers that specific smell of your morning coffee? Or maybe that incredibly embarrassing thing you said last week? Or why a name you know is right there, just refuses to come out, stuck on the tip of your tongue? Memory feels like magic, doesn't it? But it's actually a finely tuned system, and it comes with some truly surprising quirks. Today, we're taking a deep dive into unlocking the secrets of memory. We've pulled together a fascinating stack of sources to explore the processes that make memory possible, the different stages it moves through, why we forget, and even where it all happens in your amazing brain. Our mission today is to give you a shortcut to truly understanding how your memory works, its incredible power, its surprising limitations, and perhaps even some insights you can use to remember things better. We'll be breaking down core concepts like encoding, storage, and retrieval, then journeying through the stages of memory, exploring its, well, sometimes deceptive reliability, and finally, looking at the fascinating biology behind it all. So let's unpack this. To start, think of your memory like an intricate information processing system. What are the very first steps the system takes to even begin forming a memory?
Well, what's fascinating here is that memory isn't just one seamless event. It relies on three fundamental interconnected processes: encoding, storage, and retrieval. Think of them as the three pillars supporting pretty much everything you remember.
Okay, three pillars. Let's start with the first one, encoding.
Exactly. First, there's encoding. This is your brain's way of translating incoming information,
Huh?
what you see, hear, taste, touch, you name it, into a format it can actually understand and hold on to. It's like taking raw data and converting it into mental notes, basically.
Mental notes. Okay, I get that. So you've encoded it, made the note. What's next?
Yeah. Next, we have storage. This is the process of actively retaining that encoded information over time. It's literally holding on to those mental notes, tucking them away in your brain's vast library, so to speak.
Got it. Encoding, storage. And the third was retrieval.
Retrieval, yes. And finally, there's retrieval. This is when you access and bring that stored information back into your conscious awareness. It's like pulling a specific book from the library shelf or opening your mental notebook to find what you wrote earlier.
So it's not just about getting the information in, but crucially, knowing how to get it back out when you need it. We all know that frustrating feeling of having information somewhere in our head, but just not being able to access it.
Precisely. And you mentioned retrieval isn't random. That's key.
Right. Are there specific tricks our brain uses to help us pull those memories back?
Exactly. Retrieval often relies heavily on what we call retrieval cues.
Yeah.
These are specific prompts or associations that were present during the original learning or are somehow linked to the memory. Think of a familiar scent suddenly bringing back a vivid childhood memory, or a particular song instantly transporting you to a past event.
Ah, okay. Like a breadcrumb trail back to the memory.
That's a great way to put it. Those are powerful retrieval cues at work, helping your brain navigate its internal library.
That makes perfect sense. We've got these foundational pillars of encoding, storage, and retrieval, but the big question for many of us is, where do these memories actually live? And perhaps more importantly, for how long? Does our brain have different inboxes for different time frames?
It absolutely seems to. The most widely accepted framework for this is the three-stage model of memory. It proposes that information moves through distinct stages, each with its own characteristics and duration, before it can become, a lasting memory. We're talking about sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory.
Okay, three stages. Let's start with what sounds like the most fleeting, sensory memory. What exactly is happening in that initial blink and you miss it stage?
Right. Sensory memory is your brain's initial, ultra-brief holding pen for all the raw sensory information flooding in from your eyes, ears, skin, everything. It's incredibly short-lived. For visual information, we call it iconic memory. It's like your brain briefly holds a mental snapshot for just a fraction of a second.
A fraction of a second. Wow.
Yeah. Think about the trail of light you see when you wave a sparkler in the dark. That's your iconic memory briefly holding the image. For sounds, it's echoic memory, which can last a few seconds longer. You know when someone says something and you weren't quite listening, but you can sort of replay their last few words in your head to catch what they said?
Oh yeah, I do that all the time.
That's echoic memory in action. It gives you just enough time to decide if that sensory input is worth paying attention to.
So it's a critical filter, giving us a momentary chance to catch things. Okay, makes sense. What happens if we do pay attention? If something moves beyond that fleeting sensory echo, where does it go next?
Good question. If that information grabs your attention, it moves into short-term memory, which is often referred to now as working memory. This is your brain's active workbench. is where you're consciously retaining and processing a small amount of information right now. Think of it as what's currently on your mind.
Okay, the workbench. How long does stuff stay there?
It lasts for a maximum of about 30 seconds, maybe less, unless you actively work to keep it there. And what's truly fascinating here is George Miller's classic finding, you might have heard of it, that our short-term memory can typically hold about 7 bits of information, plus or minus 2.
7 bits plus or minus 2. That's really not much.
It isn't. It's a surprisingly limited capacity when you think about all the information bombarding us.
So is that why we instinctively chunk things like phone numbers or credit card numbers into smaller groups to sort of trick our short-term memory?
Precisely. That limited capacity makes chunking incredibly effective. You're not remembering 10 individual digits, you're remembering maybe 3 or 4 chunks of digits, which fits much better within that magic number 7. And to extend retention in short-term memory, we often use maintenance rehearsal.
Yeah.
Simply repeating information over and over, like mentally chanting a phone number or a shopping list item until you use it.
Right, just keep saying it. But that's just keeping it on the workbench, like you said.
Exactly. It keeps it active, but it doesn't necessarily move it to more permanent storage.
So what happens to the stuff we want to keep for longer than 30 seconds? The really important things, our lasting memories, our life experiences. That's where long-term memory comes in, right? The brain's vast archive.
That's exactly it. Long-term memory is where information is stored for much longer durations, potentially a lifetime. It's your personal autobiography, your knowledge of the world, your skills, everything. The process of converting those fragile short-term memories into stable long-term ones is called consolidation. Think of it like wet cement setting. It takes time and the right conditions to harden and become durable.
Consolidation, okay. And how do we make that happen effectively? Is it just repeating things over and over?
Well, repetition helps, but here's where it gets really interesting for actually improving your memory. To truly strengthen and consolidate new memories, we don't just repeat them blindly. We use what's called elaborative rehearsal.
Elaborative rehearsal, what's that involve?
It means forming meaningful associations between the new information and what you already know. It's not about rote memorization. It's about connecting new ideas, understanding their meaning, linking them to existing knowledge or experiences, making them, well, stickier. So if you're learning a new concept, thinking about how it relates to something you've previously learned or how it applies to your own life will make it far more memorable than just reading the definition over and over.
So the deeper we engage with information, connect it to ourselves, the more likely it is to become a lasting memory. That makes sense. It explains why just passively reading a textbook isn't always the best way to learn.
Absolutely. This ties directly into the levels of processing theory. It basically suggests that how well you remember something depends on the depth of encoding or processing. The more deeply and meaningfully you process information, thinking about its significance, relating it to your life, analyzing it, the better it will be remembered. Just glancing at something or shallow processing won't create a strong memory trace.
And these long-term memories, they're not just dumped in there randomly, are they? How are they organized?
No, they seem to be highly organized. The semantic network model is one way to think about it. It suggests that concepts are stored in interconnected networks. When you recall one concept, say apple, it activates related concepts in a ripple effect like fruit, red, round, tree, maybe even pie.
Like a giant mental spider web of related ideas.
Exactly. It helps explain how retrieving one memory can often trigger a cascade of related thoughts.
Okay, this model of memory stages and processing depth is really helpful. But now let's get into something tricky. We often think of our memories as perfect video recordings of our past, right? Flawless playbacks of events. But what does the science actually say about how reliable our long-term memories are? Are they as accurate as we tend to believe?
This is a crucial area of modern memory research, and honestly, it's quite eye-opening. The leading view today is the constructionist theory, and it fundamentally holds that memory is not a perfect replica of the past. It's more like a representation, or crucially, a reconstruction of it.
A reconstruction, not a recording.
Precisely. Your memory isn't a video recorder faithfully playing back events.
Wow.
It's much more like a storyteller, weaving a narrative based on bits and pieces of actual experience, but also filling in gaps with assumptions, beliefs, and even information acquired later.
A storyteller.
Yeah.
So it's not always telling us the exact objective truth.
Well, it's telling its truth, but that might not perfectly match the original event. A great analogy is the old game of telephone. You remember that?
Oh, yeah.
or Chinese whispers. A message starts clear.
Oh, yeah.
But by the time it gets whispered down the line, it often bears little resemblance to the original. Our memories can work similarly. Over time, original memories can become subtly distorted by new information, our current moods, our beliefs, to the point where they essentially become, well, partially or even wholly false memories.
False memories. That sounds concerning.
It can be. And this isn't usually about malicious intent or lying. It's an inherent quirk of how our memory system functions. It's designed to be flexible and adaptive, but that comes at the cost of perfect fidelity.
Can you give an example of how this distortion happens?
Sure. One powerful illustration is the misinformation effect. This is a really significant form of memory distortion, and it's especially relevant for things like eyewitness testimony. Basically, if you're exposed to incorrect or misleading information after an event has occurred, that misinformation can subtly get woven into your memory of the original event, altering it without you even realizing it.
Wow. So someone could suggest something happened, and you might later remember it that way.
Exactly. For example, classic studies have shown that if you ask witnesses about cars that smashed into each other versus cars that hit each other, the group asked with the word smashed is much more likely to later report remembering seeing broken glass, even if there wasn't any broken glass in the original scene. The word itself implants a subtle suggestion that alters the memory.
That's truly unsettling, especially considering how much weight we put on eyewitness accounts in, say, the legal system.
It absolutely is. It makes evaluating eyewitness testimony incredibly complex. The accuracy depends on so many factors, not just what the person originally saw or thinks they saw. Things like how easily they recall the event, their general knowledge, potential biases like cross-racial identification difficulties, and even the specific way questions are phrased by investigators can all influence the reported memory.
And confidence doesn't necessarily mean accuracy.
Surprisingly, no. Research shows that an eyewitness's confidence in their memory doesn't always correlate strongly with its actual accuracy. Someone can be absolutely certain about a detail that turns out to be wrong. It's a complex and often unreliable picture.
This also leads us into a really sensitive and frankly controversial topic, repressed memories. We've all heard stories, maybe seen them in movies, of people suddenly recalling traumatic childhood events years or even decades later, often in therapy. What does the research tell us about these? Are they genuine recovered memories, or are they susceptible to this reconstruction too?
It's vital to approach this topic with significant nuance and care. While it's certainly true that some individuals may not have conscious access to memories of traumatic events from childhood for a period, the idea of complete, lifelong repression of severe trauma is debated and considered relatively rare by many researchers. The controversy really heats up because these repressed memories often surface during specific therapeutic contexts, like hypnosis or certain types of psychotherapy.
Why is that controversial?
Well, the concern, backed by research on suggestibility and false memory, is that when certain techniques are used to actively probe for hidden or forgotten traumas, especially in a highly suggestive therapeutic environment, it might inadvertently induce or create false memories rather than recover genuine ones. Therapists might unintentionally shape a narrative or suggest possibilities that the client then incorporates into their memory structure.
So it's possible these recovered memories aren't always accurate recollections?
It's a definite possibility and a source of significant debate and caution within psychology and psychiatry. This isn't to dismiss the reality of trauma or the experiences of individuals, but it highlights just how fragile and malleable our memories can be, particularly when dealing with emotional events and suggestive influences. Distinguishing a genuinely recovered memory from an unintentionally constructed one can be incredibly difficult, sometimes impossible.
That context is so important. It really drives home the point that our memories are far from perfect, immutable recordings. Okay, so if memory is so vital, why do we forget so much? Is forgetting just a failure of the system, a glitch, or is there more to it?
That's another fascinating side of the coin. Forgetting is just as complex as remembering, and it's not always a failure. Sometimes forgetting unimportant details is actually adaptive. It clears space for more relevant information. There are several theories trying to explain why it happens. Let's start with that tip-of-the-tongue phenomenon you mentioned right at the beginning.
Yeah, that frustrating feeling.
That perfectly illustrates retrieval theory. The idea here isn't that the memory is gone forever, but that we simply can't access it at that moment. The memory is encoded, it's stored somewhere in that vast library.
Oh, we've lost the library card.
Exactly. We lack the right retrieval cues to pull it out. The information is there, we just can't grab it right then. It might pop up later when a better cue comes along.
Okay, so retrieval failure is one reason. What else?
Another major theory is decay theory, sometimes called trace theory. This is a more intuitive idea for many people. It suggests that memories consist of physical or chemical traces in the brain.
Like pathways?
Sort of, yeah. And these traces gradually deteriorate and fade away over time if they're not used or reactivated, much like an old photograph loses its vibrancy or ink fades on a page. Simply not using a memory can cause it to weaken.
Does this relate to how we study? Like cramming versus studying over time?
It absolutely does. This theory helps explain why spaced practice learning information over several sessions, with breaks in between, generally leads to much better long-term retention than massed practice, which is cramming everything into one long session. Spaced practice gives those memory traces more time to consolidate and resists decay better than cramming does.
Okay, decay makes sense. What other reasons are there for forgetting?
Then there's interference theory. This suggests that sometimes we forget things not because the memory trace has decayed, but because other memories get in the way. Learning new stuff can interfere with recalling old stuff, and vice versa.
How does that work?
There are two main types. Proactive interference is when older memories interfere with the retrieval of newer memories, like having trouble remembering your new phone number because your old one keeps popping into your head. And retroactive interference is the opposite, when learning new information interferes with recalling older information. Maybe you learn Spanish and then find it harder to remember the French you learned years ago. It's like the new learning overwrites or blocks access to the old.
So it's like mental clutter. Too many similar files making it hard to find the right one.
That's a good way to think about it, yeah. Too much related information can cause interference. And one more perspective, though maybe less applicable to everyday forgetting, comes from psychoanalytic theory motivated forgetting, or what Freud called repression.
Repression.
Yeah, Freud believed that certain memories, thoughts, or impulses that are particularly anxiety-provoking or threatening are actively, though unconsciously, pushed out of our awareness as a defense mechanism. Now, while this might explain some specific gaps in memory related to trauma, it doesn't really account for ordinary forgetting, like, forgetting what you read in a textbook last week or where you put your keys.
Right, that seems more like retrieval failure or maybe decay. So how do researchers actually measure how much we've remembered or forgotten?
There are a few standard ways to assess memory retention. One is free recall. This is just being asked to recall as much information as you can about a particular topic in any order you like tell me everything you remember about Chapter 5. Another common one is a recognition task. This assesses your ability to identify information you've previously learned when presented with options. Multiple choice tests are a classic example. You don't have to generate the answer from scratch, just recognize the correct one.
And recognition is generally easier.
Much easier, usually. It provides built-in retrieval cues, which is why you might ace a multiple choice test but struggle with an essay question on the same material.
Okay. And what about when memory loss is really significant, beyond just everyday forgetting? You mentioned amnesia earlier.
Right, amnesia is the general term for significant memory loss, which can result from brain injury, illness, or psychological trauma. There are two main types we often talk about. Retrograde amnesia is the loss of memory for past events, information learned before the injury or onset of illness. Someone might wake up from a concussion and not remember the accident itself, or even the hours or days leading up to it. It often affects recent memories more than distant ones because those recent memories might not have fully consolidated.
And the other type?
The other is anterograde amnesia. This is the loss or severe impairment of the ability to form or store new long-term memories after the point of injury or illness. Someone with profound anterograde amnesia might perfectly recall their life up until the injury. They might be able to hold a conversation using their short-term memory, but they won't form lasting memories of new experiences or information just minutes later. It's truly devastating, as it essentially halts the ability to create a new personal history. Damage to the hippocampus is often implicated here.
That's incredibly difficult to imagine. It really highlights how crucial these memory systems are. We've talked about the processes, the stages, the reliability, the forgetting. But let's zoom right into the physical reality now. What's actually happening inside our heads? Where do these memories physically live in the brain?
The million-dollar question. Scientists have been chasing this for a very long time. Carl Lashley famously searched for the enneagram, the physical trace of a memory, but concluded it wasn't stored in one single spot. Today, the consensus is that memories aren't located in one place, but are stored in complex, distributed networks of interconnected brain cells, or neurons. These are called neuronal networks. Different aspects of a single memory might even be stored in different brain regions and then linked together.
Okay, so networks of neurons. Is there any specific brain part that's like the central hub for memory?
One critical player, especially for forming certain types of new memories, is the hippocampus. It's a seahorse-shaped structure located deep in the temporal lobes of your forebrain. The hippocampus is primarily responsible for laying down new declarative memories. That category includes your episodic memories, memories of specific events, like what you had for breakfast or your last birthday party.
From a personal timeline.
Exactly. And also your semantic memories, your storehouse of facts and general knowledge, like knowing that Paris is the capital of France or what a dog is. The hippocampus is crucial for consolidating these types of memories from short-term into long-term storage, likely by linking together the different brain areas involved in processing that information initially.
So the hippocampus is like the brain's memory architect, helping to build these new pathways in the neuronal networks.
That's a decent analogy, yeah. It
Yeah.
seems crucial for the initial formation and organization of these declarative memories.
And what's the secret sauce? What makes those connections, those pathways in the network actually become stronger and last over time?
Well, the leading theory revolves around changes in the connections between neurons, the synapses. There's a famous saying in neuroscience, often attributed to Donald Hebb, neurons that fire together, wire together. The basic idea is that when two neurons are repeatedly activated at the same time, maybe one representing the site of an apple, the other its taste connection or synapse between them strengthens, they become more likely to activate each other in the future.
So learning physically changes the connections in your brain.
It appears so. This strengthening process is related to a phenomenon called long-term potentiation, or LTP. LTP is a long-lasting increase in the strength of synaptic connections following high-frequency stimulation. Essentially, it's how neurons learn to talk to each other more effectively and persistently after they've talked intensely before. Scientists strongly suspect that LTP, or something very much like it, is a fundamental cellular mechanism underlying learning and the formation of long-term memories. It's the physical basis of learning at the level of brain cells.
Wow. Neurons that fire together, wire together through LTP. That sounds like the absolute cutting edge of memory research. What about the genetic side of things? Does our DNA play a role in how well we remember?
Absolutely. The genetic basis of memory is an incredibly promising and rapidly evolving area of research. We now understand that the transition from fragile short-term memory to stable long-term memory isn't just about neural firing patterns. It also depends crucially on the synthesis or production of specific proteins within the neurons. And the production of these proteins is regulated by specific genes. So learning and memory formation involve turning certain genes on or off, leading to the production of proteins that physically alter the structure and function of synapses, making those connections stronger and more lasting.
So memory isn't just electrical signals, it's biochemical too, right down to our genes.
Exactly. It's a complex biochemical dance, orchestrated in part by our DNA. Understanding these genetic and molecular mechanisms, which genes, which proteins are involved, is opening up whole new ways to think about memory.
And what are the potential implications of that understanding?
Well, the long-term hope is huge. By learning more about the molecular basis of memory consolidation and storage, scientists might eventually be able to develop revolutionary treatments, perhaps even cures, for devastating memory disorders like Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. If we can understand exactly how memories are normally formed and stabilized at a molecular level, perhaps we can find ways to protect that process or even restore it when it goes wrong. It's a major frontier in neuroscience.
What an absolutely incredible journey we've taken through the landscape of memory today. From those first steps of encoding and retrieval, through the fleeting sensory blips and the surprisingly limited workbench of short-term memory, all the way to the vast archive of long-term storage and the tiny neural connections strengthening deep inside your hippocampus. We've seen how memory is this dynamic, always changing reconstructive process, definitely not a perfect recording. And we've explored why forgetting is just as complex and sometimes just as important as remembering.
It really is astonishing when you step back and look at it. How intricate and adaptable our memory system is. It's fundamentally what allows us to learn from the past, navigate the present, and plan for the future. It builds our personal narratives, creates our sense of self and continuity through time, even with all its fascinating imperfections and quirks.
Absolutely. And thinking about those imperfections, especially the reconstructive nature of memory, raises a really important question for you, our listener, to maybe ponder. Given that your memory is a reconstruction, and we know it's susceptible to things like the misinformation effect or our own biases, how does knowing this change the way you perceive your own past experiences? Does it make you think differently about strongly held memories? Or even how you consume news and information daily? How might this understanding impact how you choose to record, share, or discuss important events in your own life, knowing that the story might evolve over time? Something to think about.